Everyone, I am Art Prof teaching artist Deepti Menon, and I'm joined here today with Art Prof TA Lauryn Welch and the Prof herself, Prof Lieu. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, our topic is why you can't relate to your art professor. If you would like to strengthen and flex your art muscle, Art Prof is the community for you. We have critiques, tutorials, more, and it's all for free. So to jump right in, this is an interesting panel in my opinion, because I feel like it's a direct product of when the relationship does work out. But Lauryn, I'm going to ask you, what has been some main factors in your experience for why this relationship or this connection between teacher and student doesn't happen or doesn't work out well?
Usually it has to do with a gap in experiences, and not even, they can be even like fairly small experiences, but I think the most common ones are a generational gap. There might be a wealth gap, maybe a race gap, or even just like having a male teacher and being a female or female-bodied student is kind of can be strange sometimes. Like I had a teacher once that wouldn't let a student skip class or like marked her off because her periods were so bad that she was throwing up. She was very sick and she couldn't come into school. So you run into little things just like that where, experiences aren't aligning.
How about you, Prof. Lieu, from your perspective of both being a teacher and as a student, have you had any standout experiences that led to, your thoughts on why this relationship might go sour or just not have a connection to begin with?
I mean, I think the generational gap. Absolutely. That's a given. That's going to happen. And when I started teaching, I remember having that thought, oh, when I'm a professor, I won't do all those things. And then you end up doing those things. You become that stereotypical, out of touch professor who doesn't know what's going on. And once I started to realize that was happening, I thought, oh my goodness, I need to start talking to the students and asking them actively questions about, hey, what does this phrase mean? And I don't know what you guys are talking about. And so there are ways to relate to students who are very different in age. But as a professor, you got to actively pursue that. That's not something that will automatically happen. And so the generational differences are really, really tough. I mean, Deepti, you and I, we're not 50 years apart, but there's definitely stuff that you and Lauryn get. And I'm like, what? Yeah, it's really hard.
Yeah, Clara, I actually have a question for you about that, because when I first started teaching, I thought that one of the reasons I wanted to teach was because I just loved palling around with the students and being on the same level and really getting in their heads about what they were making, because our ages weren't that different. I started teaching classes while I was a student practically, both TAing and working summer after school programs in art. So for you, was it easier with that gap when you were younger teaching? Was it easier to make that relationship work? And has it gotten harder getting older, or what is your experience there?
It's just a different can of worms, because when you're that young, like for example, I started teaching college, I was 27. And so I was teaching students, in some cases they were 22. I was only 5 years older than them. And really the problem you keep confronting is that people think you're a student. I would walk into the office of financial aid and they'd say, oh, are you here to fill out your work study? I'm like, no, I'm here to fix my payroll. And so it's a problem because people don't respect you as much because you look so young. And I have really liked not having to deal with that for the past 10 years. It's really been nice, because I think sometimes there is that feeling with a younger teacher that you're sort of rolling in your eyes at them, that they're trying to connect with you about music and popular culture. Like, Deepti, have you ever had a really young teacher where it just was awkward that you were almost the same age?
Definitely. I mean, part of it is also just you feeling like, what am I doing with my life that you are teaching this class and I'm in it? Like, how did you get to where you are? But it is interesting because sometimes having that age gap just lets there be more of a professionalism between the teacher and student. And when they're so close to age, I actually once, I taught at a high school that was for English language learners, which meant that a lot of them were recent immigrants and English was their second language. So the high school actually capped at age 22 and I was 23 when I was teaching there. And so a couple of my students were like very much my age, like very close to my age. And I felt so uncomfortable telling these people what to do. And I was just like, this feels so bizarre. So I've actually been on the other side of it too. And finding how to draw that line of professionalism, but still be like, I get it. I get your struggles. We're all going through the same phase of life really is interesting. But the generational gap thing for me, I feel like is a huge reason. But I also think that cultural differences in my experience as a student has been huge. I once was actually a TA for a professor who I didn't know, and the class setting was such that we just watched a ton of films and analyzed them in a group setting. But this teacher was first of all, the class was made up of mostly women. I would say 80% women. And of that, I would say 80% of the women were women of color. And the teacher was a very, very old white man. And he was very sweet, but I think everything he showed us was made by straight white men, basically, which was very hard for the group to, for a whole semester, continuously engage with, because at a certain point we felt like we weren't being represented in the things that we were seeing, and it wasn't like there was a lack of it. And I think what you were saying, Clara, about your experience as a teacher and being willing to learn and willing to listen and adapt was the key link that was missing here, because even when those things were proposed, there was a reception, but there was no action taken, and we weren't seeing results. So I think that was one of the experiences. And as a TA, I felt like I had to be a liaison, but at the end of the day, I was on the side of the students because I was a student. I also just didn't feel like I could relate. But Clara, as also a woman of color, did you ever feel like as a teacher working in academia, even with other teachers, or as a student, that was a struggle for you building these relationships?
I mean, it's really hard because, like you said earlier, you have to be really clear about your boundaries, because you can walk the line where you're verging on being inappropriate, and that makes the students really uncomfortable. And I think that can be really hard. I mean, what I usually do is the beginning of the semester, I do really keep that distance, and I don't try to have a more fun conversation until we're at midterm or something like that. So setting those boundaries is important. But I think the thing about it is that it's just there. Like unless you really actively are aware of it and are trying so hard, it's just really, really difficult to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a comment from Neil that is talking about these issues here with this maintaining this boundary. Neil says, my advisor is young and he likes to play matchmaker in class. It's really awkward.
That's totally inappropriate.
Yeah, that's really beyond the pale. Have either of you had an experience with that where a teacher gets too comfortable with you?
I mean, I hear stuff from students because I guess they call me at RISD, I was called the crying professor. I guess everybody would cry in front of me in the classroom. And I had a female student say to me, yeah, when I talk to this professor and we're sitting down, I cross my arms over my thighs because I don't want him to touch me on the knee. And there are definitely people that do not respect boundaries. And it was an older white man. I mean, it's really frustrating. So you got to draw the line. Well, Lauryn, let's talk a little bit about situations where you have not related, but maybe you as students did something to proactively change that relationship. Have you done that?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, I feel like my role in classrooms a lot of the times is not the same as who I am as a person in everyday life. I'm a little bit more confrontational and wanting to get my money's worth out of my professors, I guess. So we have one professor this past year at Hunter, and she's pretty cool, but oh my God, this class was just... most of the time I didn't know what was going on. And I feel like I'm not, I'm not super unlearned in art history and stuff. I just didn't understand her critique style, and neither did the rest of the class. We would have talks outside of the classroom, talk together and be like, oh, nobody else is getting it either. And it'd be like we bring an exhibition or piece to class and get critique on it, and she would say, oh, this is too broad, this is not right, I don't understand this doesn't make any sense. But then once you explained it, what you were trying to get at, you just went further down this rabbit hole, further down this tangle of not being able to understand what she was saying or what she was trying to get out of you. It was very frustrating. So there was a point during the class where we asked her, can you share some of your previous work, both in coming up with exhibitions and then also your own artwork that you make? And at first she was pretty resistant to it. She was also frustrated, being not understanding why we weren't getting it, or why we weren't getting what she was saying, and why we were so slow. And eventually she gave in, she did it. And the way that she talked about her work and the way that she talked about conceiving her projects really was a huge eye-opener about how she thought about things, just period. And it made it much easier to be able to both speak with her just on a general level, and also to come up with a kind of project that we could work together on, and that she would understand and we would understand. And that was probably the most successful intervention, I guess, that we've ever had. But it wouldn't have happened if the students hadn't come together and shared their experiences with each other first in a safe space, being like, oh, this is really are you guys having this experience? Because this is the experience I'm having.
I love that. Because, sorry. I was just going to say, I like that because at the end of the day, all these professors are people too with flaws, and we have to realize that they're bringing their own perspectives into things. But I love that this professor of yours was open to that dialogue. And I mean, of course, it took a little convincing, but that's how we all grow. And at the end of the day, the teacher-student relationship is so important. So hearing that the students were willing to put in the work to get what they wanted out of it, and the teacher was also willing to receive that and meet them halfway, is such a good example of how something that could easily have been turned sour was flipped on its head and turned into something really productive. And hopefully both parties moving forward can use that as a, something to fall back on and remember as a positive way of working.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I tell students when they start a class with me, listen, this is a two-way street. We're having a conversation, and it's not a situation where you come in and I just give you stuff and you leave. It's not like that. You guys have to bring other things to the table, and you got to tell me if something's really not happening. And I think as a professor, the second you put that out there as a possibility, it opens the students' minds, and they realize, oh, I do have some power and some say in this dialogue, and I'm not just here to have somebody shove something down my throat and regurgitate it later. And I think that's really important. Now, on the other hand, you can also have situations that are so extreme that you almost just roll your eyes and give up. So anyway, let's look at this comment from Ray.
Yeah, Ray says, I had an instructor who would say, you've got black and white down, try color now. Imagine my surprise when I later learned that he was colorblind to yellow and green. So there's an example of a really basic lack of connection that if you don't ask, you're just not going to know. You're just speaking totally different languages and not even realizing it.
So interesting.
I just love that.
That's a new one. Well, I have a story that actually comes from me talking to one of my colleagues but it is very much speaking to the generational differences, because sometimes it's not the behavior that's the generational difference, it's the content. Sometimes the content that is taught in class, it's so woefully out of date that you just, as a student, are so frustrated. I mean, I had this one class I was teaching, it was called Senior Seminar, and I was supposed to prepare the students for life after school. So I had to show them how to get their work out there, prepare a resume, write a cover letter, that type of thing. And I taught them what I thought was useful and relevant. And I was criticized later by the department head. They said, you're teaching them to write a resume with an approach that is too businesslike. And this is not going to get them positions in the art world. I was like, it's a resume. Like, what am I supposed to do? And then they actually backed it up and they said, well, I learned this when I worked in career services at this college. And I thought, you've been at the school for so many decades that must have been in the 70s. And what am I supposed to say to that, Deepti? I mean, like...
Yeah, it's hard because it feels like people aren't really, like this person specifically isn't really, again, being receptive to the changes in the industry and also the students and, you know, the fact that you were hired to do this job because you clearly knew what you were doing, you know, and I think it's so ironic to say that something that's purely to get a job, which is a business, and it, like being an artist is a business, you are a business. The thing that will get you that job is too business-like, that just feels so out of touch. And again, I mean, I don't know if those were the person's exact words, but I feel like that just feels like really not constructive criticism. Like, what are you supposed to do with that? You know, like, again, it's like a human to human connection, like present something that's maybe a little bit more, you know, useful for you to move forward with.
I mean, my favorite thing is that when this professor was giving me materials for the class, I'm not joking, they handed me this book. You know, when you look at the graphic design of a book and it just screams 60s and you're like, I don't think this is relevant anymore because the industry's changed so much. I mean, Lauryn, think about what it was like being a fine artist before the internet and what it's like now. I mean, everything is different. And if you're not paying attention, and I had professors who were very, very successful in the 80s. Like, I know you're an MFA student right now. How does that make you feel?
It just reminds me actually of conversations that I have had with my dad, who some of you might know, he's an artist and he also was a teacher and both lower K through 12 and higher ed. And so he'll do these teacherly kinds of things sometimes, trying to show me how to do things in the world or how to market myself. I'm like, Dad, the last time you submitted your work for something, it was through slides. You use slides.
You're putting silver tape on them.
Yeah. Or like, I have to show you how to edit your photos of your work in Photoshop. Like, this should be a back and forth between us. This isn't you handing down information because this information is a little bit out of date now. I don't know.
It's funny. One of my favorite professors was actually a duo. And what I loved about them is they had been teaching for so long. I mean, not so long, I'm not trying to age them, but like for a long time, they were very, very established and knew what they were talking about, a wealth of knowledge. But neither of them, they taught this class together, neither of them had any issue admitting that they didn't have an answer to a question, or they never pushed back when I proposed something that they were unfamiliar with. And what I loved is that they just redirected me to someone else that I think, like, they were so encouraging to reach out to other professors, reach out to your peers. Oh, you know, I had a student 5 years ago who's now doing this that could probably help you. And it really just showed that, like, they were standing in their truth of, like, what they knew, you know, but also there was no ego. And I think that, like, you know, ego and having almost like a cult following as a teacher and being really, like, I guess egotistical is something that I've seen a lot in school. But like, these professors were such a good example of these duo who were just loved and are still loved today, but they are so knowledgeable, but also they have no level of like snarkiness or feeling like they have to, put on this pompous personality to maintain this admiration and love they have from their students, which is so well deserved. And I'm wondering if either of you have had experience like that, or on the flip side of teachers who really do have these big egos, and that makes it kind of hard for you to relate to them.
It's all over academia. I mean, you see these, and I'm sorry to say, most of them are older white male professors who have this group of art school students that follow them around campus like little puppies. And you can see these professors, they're just soaking it in. I mean, they are eating that up because it just feeds their ego like crazy. And the part that drives me the most crazy is that they really cultivate the students making artwork that looks just like theirs. And I don't think that's cool, because fine, if you want to look at the professor's artwork and absorb from that, but literally I would see students making practical replicas using the same technique, the same imagery, the same style. I don't think that's a good way to teach. I think you're not really letting the students cultivate their voice. I mean, Lauryn, you and I could not be more different in terms of our artistic tastes, but I didn't want to make you draw screaming angry people. That's not your thing, right?
I'm very thankful you didn't make me draw screaming angry people. I'm so the opposite of that. Like, I think I would cry if I had to do something like that. But you're right. I have been in a situation where that is the case. And it's also, this all has to do, I think really the core in this conversation is talking about how do you honor your students, or how do you honor your teachers in this power dynamic that can be easily abused or taken advantage of. Like when you go to school, you're expecting to learn something from an expert, from a teacher, but you're also expecting to be respected. And by being respected, that's having your own voice or letting your own voice grow in a lot of cases. And I, in my undergrad years, preferred teachers who were very, I'm going to say, intense and have strong personalities. And a lot of those were white male professors, because that's just kind of like a trope almost, right? And one thing that was not great was that I didn't realize that I would be trying to, or I wouldn't realize that I was falling into making artwork that was similar to the professor, but it was because that personality was so strong, and they're like, "Oh, do this, do this, do this." I'm like, "Okay, I will. I want to. I want to get your approval. Like, I really want that." And a lot of students really want that approval. They either want the A, or they just want their teacher to like them, or they want someone that they can connect with. So they'll do that. And it's really harmful to the growth of the student. And I haven't realized that happened to me until after I got out of those classes. And so now I make it a point to be more discerning about which teachers I have as professors, and also like realize that that cult of personality, like there are signs of it that you can find when you're in that situation.
And it's hard too, because like as a student, you're bearing so much of your soul into the work that you make, even if it's not narratively like has anything to do with you. Just the amount of work that goes into making a piece that you put up on the wall for critique. It's, at least in my experience, it was really hard to distance yourself from just wanting that teacher's approval, because especially at a collegiate level, more often than not, you are picking your teachers, at least at a certain point. And so you're picking them because you admire them. And then to have them just not see eye to eye, or not try and understand your perspective, and then just flip it and make it about themselves or what they view as good art, it's so hard not to just be like, okay, well, I'm just going to change everything and try to please you, because A, you don't want your soul crushed every week, and B, you admire this person and you want them to like what you have to say.
Yeah, on that note, Hannah Schmidt is saying, I was so unmotivated last semester, and then for doing the thing they wanted from me, and I still didn't do well grade-wise, even though I got no feedback. That is also something that really happens with these personalities. Have you ever been in an experience where your teacher is so resistant to talking about your work because it's different that they just won't give you any feedback? Deepti, have you been in that situation?
Sorry, like a teacher not giving me feedback because my work is so different than theirs. Is that the question?
Yeah, or not giving any useful feedback, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of times it had to do with work that was like hyper culturally specific. And a lot of times those conversations just ended up being this like circle of me having to like explain details about my upbringing or just things that weren't really relevant. I think at the end of the day in critique, you can still have a lack of understanding when you go to a museum and see something that's super specific, but still find ways to be, polite, or like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like respectful to that person's narrative, but give them criticism without having to sit there and interrogate them and make them uncomfortable or, feel like now they're having to educate you and their 15 minutes of critique time has gone and them trying to explain, what a bindi is and, or like, something very specific where it's like, you could, just figure that out later and, with what I'm giving you, try. So I've had a lot of those where it just feels like I put a lot of effort into this and sure, I'll answer a few questions, but spending all this time just answering questions about my culture when we could still have a very useful conversation about technique or concept that, but now we're just sitting in circles. I feel like that has been an experience that I've had for sure.
Yeah, that it seems like it's extremely common. Like if I've had it and you've had it, and Clara's probably had it, we've all had it. So how do we, Slepnir is asking, how do we grow without any explanation? How do you take your education into your own hands?
I mean, I think part of that is being really clear about what you're trying to do. And maybe as a student, instead of feeling like you just have to answer questions, maybe you ask the question to the teacher and you say, well, listen, why is all of this have to be explained? And shouldn't this be something that you can take away from it? And so it goes back to that idea that nobody's right in art school. I mean, just because they're the teacher, it doesn't mean that they know better than you about certain things. I mean, we did a stream yesterday about racism in art school. And one of the things I said was that just because I'm the professor, it doesn't mean I'm the expert on racism. If anything, it means that I'm just as much having difficulty navigating that topic because nobody is an expert on a topic like that. And so it's hard because you do need a professor that gives you the space to be able to do that, because there are some professors who will very quickly just shut you down. For example, if you are in one of those cult of personality classes and you've got 10 students who are miniature versions of the professor, and here you are doing something totally different, that's going to be hard to keep up after a while because you just get tossed down every semester. You don't want to do that every single week. So it's very, very tricky. And I have students who make that assumption about me the first week of class. They will go to my TA and they'll say, what is Clara like? What can I do to get on her good side? And I'm like, make your own stuff. That's what I want you to do. And it's hard to do what you want to do sometimes. I know that sounds really weird, but as an art school student, Lauryn, don't you think sometimes it's hard to follow through on what you want to do just because there's so much self-doubt?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've brought this up in a couple streams, but especially when you're working with a bunch of other students in a studio together, it becomes a little bubble and you all catch each other's viruses, both, I'm going to call them like painting viruses or art viruses. It's not just painting, and emotional viruses. So one person uses a color palette and then it spreads around the room, or one person is feeling negatively about something, it spreads around the room. So even though you are there as an individual wanting to forge a path for yourself and your own life as an artist, you are also part of this weird organic collective of creativity that it's almost like you need to nurture the whole community there if you yourself want to survive and understand that, like, yes, you are a separate part, but you also need to know that that collective part is there balancing you out, and like be aware of those weird boundaries or lack of them. Deepti,
and it's also hard. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I would go ahead. I was going to ask Deepti a question after.
I think it's also hard because sometimes you get these people who are clearly favorites in the class. I know people are like, teachers shouldn't play. They totally do. Are you crazy? There's so many teachers that play favorites. And so if you're not the favorite and you're not making the work that they want you to make, what are you supposed to do in that situation? It's so endlessly frustrating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting too, because I think like a lot of times you feel like asking your peers for help might not be as beneficial as the teacher who is the teacher, because they obviously know the most. But I think it is important to realize that it's okay to reach out to other teachers, your peers, an online community like Art Prof to get other feedback, because you know, at the end of the day, one person can't give you all the answers that you're looking for. And if you're in a situation where they're just not giving you feedback, or you're going in this roundabout conversation that's not producing anything, maybe seek out some other opinions and realize that everyone has knowledge that's useful, and it can really, you know, help you. So, you know, Art Prof is a great place to do that. And your peers, your former professors, it's everywhere.
Komodo Dragon is asking, is there any way to discourage the creation of favorites within a classroom? Clara, I think this one's for you.
I think part of it is really evaluating each student at their level. For example, I sometimes would have students who had exceptional drawing technique. And you would think, oh, they're just going to get a good critique every single time. But I would give them tough critiques, and I would also have people who struggled for so long, and then they'd have a breakthrough, and I would just rant and rave about what a great job they did. So I feel like if you are always giving the same two students positive critiques, and these other three students are always getting negative critiques, that says something about you as a teacher. I don't think there's any student who is always bad all the time unless they never come to class. And I don't think there's any student in art school who's always great and amazing all the time. And so you have to make sure that there's a range of receptions to the artwork, which is inevitable. I mean, like, Deepti, did you make bad work in art school?
Oh my gosh, I think 80% of my work was bad work.
But I'm sure you also made really good work.
Yeah, well. But I think what's important is I can't think of one professor I had that I felt like I was a favorite of, and I feel good about that. Like I feel like all my professors, I felt like I got a good balance from them, which is, you know, what you want. You don't want someone to be, you know, fanning you with compliments. But it's interesting because it draws it back to what you said, Clara. It took me a while to realize that I was in a position as a student to challenge my professors too, and ask them questions and turn things on their head, because, you know, of course, like no professor is going to know all the answers. And if you are making work that they don't understand, of course, they're allowed to ask a few questions. But when it gets to the point of you're really not getting any feedback or anything like that, I think the power of being like, okay, let's focus here. Like, here are some things that I need, like, I really want feedback on, and like being like, hey guys, or presenting it to the students and being like, I know that you have a lot of questions about my work, or I know that there is some gaps, but like, how could I make that clearer? Or, you know, I'm really concerned about this, and just really point, it's your time and you're there. And especially in like a higher private institution or a college level, you're paying to be there. So, you know, ask those questions, take power. It's your work, it's your time. Feel confident in doing that.
I mean, Lauryn, I know you were so good about that when you were in my class. And as a teacher, I feel like I'm just along for the ride. It's great when you have students like that, because so much of the time I do have to spend time saying it's okay to disagree with me. It's okay for you to think something is inherently better or worse, and that everybody has their own taste. And sometimes the critiques really do come across as just a matter of taste. It's like, well, one is not better. It's just one's an apple and one's an orange. And which one do you like eating better, right? An apple is not a better fruit than an orange. I mean, it is to some people, but not to everybody. And so I think acknowledging that diversity of opinions can be really important. But Lauryn, how as a student do you get over the fear? Because a lot of students are very intimidated by their professors, and the idea of disagreeing is scary. So how do you get over that as a student?
Man, I don't know if I'm qualified to really talk for everybody, because I think that I can sometimes, how do I put this? Even though academia is a bubble and a classroom is a basically fake setup, it's not the real world. Your relationships with your peers and your teachers outside of academia are something that are real. And so when I was younger, I wasn't thinking about things like retribution, but that is something that like I feel concerned about as a MFA student, that seeing stuff like that happen, like toxic dynamics between teachers and students. So on the one side, there's that. But on the other side, I do think it's important to realize that grades in the art world, they don't really matter at all. Really, nobody is ever going to look at your grade that you got in foundations drawing. I'm sorry, Clara, nobody's ever going to look at that.
Just get the degree. That's what I say.
Yeah. And also, your classroom experience is fairly limited to the classroom. So you kind of have, once you realize that that is a construct, you have the freedom to warp that construct. And I think it's really important to let the other students know that as well, that it is a construct and you have power in that as a student. You are always better off working together as a collective in a kind of collective bargaining situation where you can change the atmosphere of the place you're in if you're all in it together. I'm not even talking about in an adversarial way. I mean, like, everybody can get on the same page and change it into a really good and productive environment. I think it's I don't even know. I feel like it's easier to do this at the undergrad level. I maybe because I've already been through that and realized, okay, things are fine. The master's level, things feel a little bit more tied to real life. I don't know if that's because I'm in it right now or not, but you have to, there's a care with relationships with teachers that I think I'm thinking about more now, especially with things going on with like dealing with racism in institutions that I wasn't aware of when I was an undergrad student. So I don't know. I'm treading lightly on this. Deepti, you said you had some experience with that too, with this one professor that you had that was only showing one type of film and the students didn't look like anybody in the film.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's again about like realizing that you're there to take to get an education. And if you don't feel like you're getting that, taking that into your own hands. And I love what you said, Lauryn, about working as a collective. And at the end of the day, like, there, of course, are going to be moments where you're like afraid of a teacher. They might have a lot of like power over you. But you know, you can't have every sour situation turn sweet. It's just not statistically possible. And realizing that this one teacher is not the person who's going to make or break your career or make or break you as an artist. And you should really, like, if you're making all the effort and you don't feel like you're being met halfway, I think finding other outlets. I mean, of course, talk to your department and bring it up. You know, don't be silent about things, and you realize that your voice does have power. But if nothing is happening, and that's quite often, you know, the case, reach out to your peers. Find, like in that class with the teacher who was showing a lot of stuff and just wasn't being receptive. I think it was important for the students I was glad that I was a teaching artist, because at least we could have conversations outside of class and we could share things via email and form our own communities. Because like I said, the teacher is not, you know, God or anyone who has this all saying power. At the end of the day, everyone is human, everyone has flaws, but it's important to figure out what works for you and remember that you're in charge of your career, you're in charge of your artistic development, and just know that you have the power and you're cool and you're great and your art deserves, you know, the attention and care that you want for it. That's
I do want to add, though, you guys, while I definitely think you should try things, as Lauryn is saying, advocate for yourself, make connections with your other peers, it's okay to say, you know what? This is just not a relationship that's going to work out. That's fine. You can pick your battles, because sometimes it is not worth your time. I mean, that professor who told me the resume was too businesslike, what am I going to say to them that's ever going to change their mind? And sometimes it's not worth your effort. And that's fine. You're not going to connect with every teacher. There's going to be teachers who you just are like, no way, I don't think so. Yeah. That's okay too. So don't worry about that.
Yeah, but what an interesting stream. This was like really interesting to have this conversation with like two former students with a former professor who we all like love. And yeah, so much to talk about. But I just wanted to note that if you guys are interested, our prof is now a podcast, thanks to dear Lauryn, who fought for this to be a thing. So we are on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and you guys should absolutely check it out if you enjoy our live streams. And if you could rate it and leave a review, that would be really cool, because we love to hear what you guys have to say about things, and we like to feel the love as well. I also wanted to note that you should join us on Discord. The three of us will be there in about like 5 to 10 minutes in the post live streams channel. And the invite link is in the video description below. If you are not on our Discord as of yet, please subscribe to our channel. We do these live streams all the time, and they're all fantastic and diverse. And just a huge thank you to our top Patreon supporters. None of this would be possible without your generous support. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. This was really fun, and what a cool conversation. Thanks for the comments, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye. Bye.